I filed for divorce, and my husband begged me to stay. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when I finally hit submit. The document that had been sitting on my desk for the past few weeks was now officially filed. My hands trembled as I closed my laptop, the weight of the decision pressing down on my chest. I had been married to Evan for 10 years. 10 years. And yet, in all that time, I had never felt more alone. The spark had long since faded. The love we once shared had turned into something more like companionship. Two people coexisting in the same space without truly seeing each other. Our conversations had become routine, our arguments predictable, and our lives were just passing by. The hardest part, though, wasn't the decision to file for divorce. It was the guilt. Guilt for wanting more. Guilt for not being content with the life we had built. Guilt for knowing that, in many ways, Evan didn't deserve this. He wasn't a bad person, not at all. But we had simply grown apart, and I didn't know how to fix it anymore. I had tried. We both had. But nothing had changed. That evening, when Evan came home, I couldn't bring myself to say anything. He walked through the door, his usual tired smile on his face, and I smiled back, though it felt hollow. We exchanged pleasantries like we always did. "How was your day?" "Oh, it was fine. How was yours?" "The same." But as he hung his coat and tossed his keys into the dish by the door, I could feel it. The tension building between us. Something unspoken. A weight in the air. I had wanted to tell him earlier, but the words never felt right. How do you tell someone you've shared your life with that you don't want to share it anymore? Dinner was silent. We ate our pasta and salad, not because we were hungry, but because that was what you did at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. The conversation didn't pick up, and the TV didn't distract us either. I found myself staring at my plate, lost in thought, wondering if this was really the right thing to do. But as I glanced up at Evan, his eyes met mine, and I knew. He knew something was wrong. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. There was concern there. I felt a pang in my chest. How had we come to this? To this point where he could tell something was wrong, but we couldn't talk about it? "I'm fine," I replied, though my voice betrayed me. It cracked just a little, just enough for him to know it wasn't true. He studied me for a moment, his brow furrowed. "No, you're not." "What's going on, Lily?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. Instead, tears welled up in my eyes. I hated myself for being weak, for letting my emotions spill out. But there was no stopping it. The years of built-up frustration, resentment, and loneliness came crashing down all at once. I filed for divorce," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Evan froze mid-bite, his fork hanging in the air. His eyes widened and his face paled. "What? You filed for divorce?" I nodded, unable to speak anymore. The silence between us grew, stretching out until it felt like we were in different worlds. I watched as he set his fork down, his hands trembling ever so slightly. You filed for divorce?" he repeated, this time in a voice that was barely a whisper. "Why?" I tried to explain, tried to put the years of distance, the lack of communication, the endless nights lying awake alone into words. But every time I opened my mouth, I couldn't find the right ones. I wanted to say it all. To tell him how tired I was of pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. How exhausted I was from carrying the weight of a marriage that had stopped working long ago. But instead, I just sat there, tears running down my face. Evan didn't speak right away. He just stared at me, his eyes searching mine for something. For an explanation? For an answer he already knew but didn't want to hear? I didn't know. And I didn't know if I could give him that answer anyway. Finally, he stood up, his chair scraping against the floor, and walked over to me. Slowly, he reached out and cupped my face in his hands. His touch was gentle, almost as if he was afraid that if he moved too quickly, I might shatter in his arms. "Lily," he said softly, his voice cracking. Please don't do this. His words, though simple, cut through me. I had expected anger, maybe even frustration, but instead there was fear in his eyes. Fear of losing me. Fear of losing everything we had built, even if it wasn't perfect. It was as though he had suddenly woken up to the reality of how far we had drifted apart, and how much he still cared. I can't, I started, but the words didn't come out right. How could I explain that the love I once felt had faded? That it felt like we were two strangers trying to remember how to be in love? But Evan wasn't letting go. Please, he whispered again, his voice barely audible. I know we've had our problems, but we can fix this. We can work through this. I love you, Lily. I don't want to lose you. I pulled away slightly, my heart aching. Evan, it's not enough anymore. I don't know if it ever was. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like we were really seeing each other. But that didn't change the fact that I had already made up my mind. At least, I thought I had. I stepped back from Evan, my chest tightening as I tried to breathe through the weight of his plea. The words felt like 1,000 needles, each one pricking at the wall I had spent years building. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that we could somehow return to the place where things were easy and full of love. But somewhere along the way, I had lost that belief, and I didn't know how to find it again. Evan stood there, still holding his breath, waiting for me to say something. Anything. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and desperation, as though he were caught in a dream that he couldn't wake up from. His hand, still lingering near my cheek, trembled slightly. It was the first time I had seen him so vulnerable, so raw. I don't know what you want me to say, Evan, I whispered, my voice cracking. I don't know if I can go back to what we were. It feels like we're just two people passing by each other, pretending to be happy. The silence between us grew, suffocating in its heaviness. Evan didn't respond right away. He simply stood there, staring at me, his eyes filled with so many unspoken emotions: confusion, regret, hope, and fear. And for a brief moment, I saw something else in his eyes, something I hadn't noticed in years. Love. I don't want to lose you, Lily, he finally said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I don't know what's been happening between us, but I'm willing to fight for us. I don't care if it takes time. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I swallowed hard, fighting back the tears. I don't know if it's enough, Evan. I've been trying to convince myself that it is, but I can't ignore how empty I feel anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything is okay when it's not. He stepped closer to me, his hand now resting gently on my shoulder. Then let's talk. Let's figure it out together. I'll listen. I'll do better. We can rebuild. Please, Lily, don't let go. His words hit me like a tidal wave. My heart ached as I looked at him, the man I had once loved with everything I had. We had built a life together, memories, dreams, a home, and now it felt like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall. But what if I wasn't ready to let go yet? What if I was too scared to face the unknown, too scared to admit that maybe there was still something worth saving? I shook my head, unable to form a coherent thought. How do we even start, Evan? How do we go back to the way things were? I don't know, he admitted, his voice soft. But I do know that I'm not ready to give up. I love you too much to let you walk away without at least trying. Let's take it one step at a time. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to try. I looked at him, searching his face for any signs of insincerity, but all I saw was the same man I had married. The man who used to make me laugh, who held me when I cried, who cared deeply for me in a way that no one else ever had. And in that moment, a small flicker of hope ignited deep within me. But it wasn't enough to undo everything that had happened. everything I had been feeling for the past few years. It wasn't enough to erase the loneliness or the exhaustion of trying to make things work when neither of us seemed to know how. "I don't know if I can do this, Evan," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I'm so tired. I need to feel like I'm more than just someone you're living with." His face softened and he took my hand gently in his. "You're more than that, Lily. You always have been. I never stopped loving you. I don't know where we lost each other, but I want to find a way back." I felt a lump form in my throat. What if he was right? What if we could find our way back to each other? I didn't know the answers, and the uncertainty was terrifying. But I couldn't ignore the small spark of hope that was beginning to grow. Maybe we weren't beyond saving. "I don't know how to fix this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I'll try. I'll try, Evan. For us." A look of relief washed over his face. He pulled me into a gentle hug, and for a moment, I allowed myself to lean into him. The familiar warmth of his embrace reminded me of the love we had once shared, and though it felt distant, it didn't feel completely out of reach. "I'll do everything I can to make it right," he murmured, holding me close. "I promise." We stood there for what felt like an eternity, wrapped in each other's arms. The world outside continued on, but for a brief moment, it felt like it was just the two of us. No divorce papers, no unresolved issues, just a man and a woman trying to find their way back to something they once had. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if this would work, if we would be able to rebuild what had crumbled. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like we had a chance. And that was enough for me to take a deep breath and hold on, just a little longer. The next few days were filled with awkwardness and tentative steps toward reconnection. It wasn't easy. The weight of the words I had spoken, the ones that felt like a final goodbye, hung over us. But there was a shift in the air, a delicate sense of hope that had been absent for so long. We were no longer just coexisting. We were both trying, in our own ways, to rediscover each other. Evan was different. It wasn't that he had changed completely, but something had clicked in him. It was like the fog that had clouded his eyes had lifted, and I could see the man I had fallen in love with again. He was trying, truly trying, to listen to me in ways he never had before. Little gestures, bringing me coffee in the morning, asking how my day went, complimenting me in ways that felt genuine, reminded me of the man I had married, the one who had always made me feel seen. But old habits die hard. As much as I wanted to believe that we could turn things around, the doubts lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that the problems we had were still there, lurking just beneath the surface. The long years of neglect and miscommunication couldn't be erased overnight, and part of me was terrified that this new, hopeful version of Evan would eventually fade, just like everything else had. One evening, about a week after the filing, I sat on the couch, my mind racing. Evan was in the kitchen, humming softly as he made dinner, his presence filling the room with an energy I hadn't felt in ages. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house wasn't filled with silence. And yet, the more I tried to enjoy it, the more the fear crept in. What if this was just a phase? What if this was just another empty promise? I closed my eyes, trying to quiet the storm in my head, when I heard Evan's voice, warm and inviting. "Dinner's ready," he called out. I took a deep breath and stood up, forcing myself to push aside my worries, to focus on the present. Maybe this wasn't perfect. Maybe it wasn't even close to what we had once dreamed of. But maybe, just maybe, it was enough to begin with. I walked into the kitchen to find him setting the table, a smile on his face. "I hope it's good," he said, a bit nervously. "It's the first time I've cooked in a while." I smiled, appreciating the effort. "I'm sure it'll be great," I said, though I couldn't hide the hesitation in my voice. We sat down to eat, and for a few minutes there was nothing but the sound of our silverware clinking against the plates. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it wasn't the easy flow of conversation we used to have. There were still unspoken words between us, things neither of us was ready to confront. I could tell Evan was trying to find the right moment to ask the question that had been hanging over us since that night I filed for divorce. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft. "Lily, do you think we can fix this?" The question hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable. It was the same question he had asked the night I told him I wanted a divorce, but it felt different now. This time, it wasn't desperation in his voice. It was a quiet hope, a genuine desire to make things work. I put my fork down and met his gaze. There was so much in those eyes. So much love, but also so much fear. Fear of losing me for good. I could see it clearly now. He wasn't asking me to fix everything. He wasn't asking me to wave a magic wand and make it all better. He was asking if I was willing to try, to rebuild with him piece by piece. "I don't know," I said quietly. "I really don't. I don't know if I can forget everything that's happened, all the times I felt invisible or alone, but I want to try too. I owe us that much." Evan's expression softened, and he reached across the table, taking my hand in his. His touch was warm, reassuring, but there was a quiet urgency in it. "I'm sorry, Lily. I know I failed you, and I know I can't undo the past. But I promise you, I will do everything I can to make sure you never feel that way again. You're not invisible to me." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I quickly blinked them away. "I've missed you," I whispered. "I've missed us." His thumb gently stroked the back of my hand, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were no longer just living in the same house. We were reconnecting. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe we couldn't erase the years of hurt, the moments of neglect, or the nights spent alone. But what mattered now was that we were choosing to try again. The evening passed in a quiet, tentative kind of peace. After dinner, we sat on the couch together, not speaking much, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel forced. I rested my head on Evan's shoulder, and he held me close, his hand lightly brushing my hair. It wasn't the passionate love we had once shared, but it was something else. A kind of quiet comfort, a bond that was still there if we were both willing to fight for it. I didn't know where this would lead. I didn't know if we could truly find our way back to the love we had once had, or if we were simply clinging to something that was long gone. But for now, that didn't matter. What mattered was that we were trying, together. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure of the future, but I was no longer afraid of it. The days that followed weren't filled with grand gestures or dramatic moments. They were quiet, simple, and filled with small efforts. At first, I questioned whether these efforts would be enough to heal the wounds that had been created over the years. Could a few thoughtful actions truly erase the loneliness, the disconnect, and the bitterness that had built up? But something about Evan's determination made me want to believe. He wasn't trying to fix everything in a day. He was just trying to show me that he cared again. And that, at least, was a start. Our mornings had changed. Evan had always been a night owl, and I was an early riser. That used to mean we'd barely see each other in the mornings, and if we did, it was rushed. A kiss on the cheek as he dashed out the door, or a quick, "see you tonight," over coffee. But now he made an effort to wake up with me, to sit down for breakfast together before the world came crashing in. I noticed the way he looked at me when I spoke. Really looked at me, with eyes that were no longer distracted or preoccupied. It felt good. It felt like we were finally taking the time we had neglected for so long. Still, there was the lingering question. Could we truly fix what had been broken? There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if we were just postponing the inevitable. There was always that voice in the back of my head, reminding me of the years we'd spent drifting apart, the long silences, the emptiness that had crept into our relationship. One evening, about 2 weeks after our conversation, we were sitting on the porch, drinking wine, watching the sunset. Evan had started gardening again, a hobby he used to love. The sight of him, kneeling in the dirt, Planting flowers and herbs reminded me of the man I had fallen in love with all those years ago. I realized with a strange clarity that part of the problem wasn't just that we had drifted apart. It was that we had stopped investing in each other, stopped cultivating the little things that once made our life together so beautiful. Do you ever think about the future? I asked softly, taking a sip of my wine. Evan, who had been staring out at the horizon, turned to face me. His expression softened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the old Evan. The one who dreamed, the one who had big ideas about life, about us. All the time, he said quietly. I've been thinking about how I want to spend it. And I know this might sound crazy, but I want to spend it with you, if you'll let me. I swallowed, a lump forming in my throat. You're asking me to stay, I said, almost as a statement, my voice barely above a whisper. I am, he said, his voice sincere, but there was something almost pleading in it. I know I've made mistakes. I know I've let you down, but I'm asking you to let me make it right. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to work for it. Together. I set my glass down, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Hope, fear, love. It all swirled inside me, and I didn't know what to do with it. For so long, I had been running away from this moment, from the vulnerability of choosing to stay. And now that Evan was offering it to me, I wasn't sure I could fully accept it. The truth was, I didn't know if I could forgive him completely, or if I could ever forget the pain I had felt. But for the first time in a long time, I realized something. Maybe love wasn't about having it all figured out. Maybe it was about making a choice every single day to try, to be vulnerable, to show up for each other even when things weren't perfect. Evan, I paused, taking a deep breath. I don't know if I'm ready to make promises I can't keep. But I do know that I'm willing to try. And that maybe is enough right now. He looked at me, his eyes filled with relief, mixed with something else. Hope, maybe. That's all I need. I'm not asking for perfection. I'm just asking for a chance. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Okay, we'll take it one day at a time. And so, we did. Slowly, cautiously, we began to rebuild. We didn't jump into anything too fast. We didn't pretend that the past didn't matter. But we did start talking more. Really talking. About our dreams, our fears, the things that had been left unsaid for so long. We learned to be patient with each other again, to respect the space we both needed to heal. We made time for each other, even when life got busy. We took weekend trips, we cooked together, we laughed about silly things, and slowly the spark, though faint, began to flicker. One day, as we were cooking dinner together, our usual routine now, Evan turned to me, his face soft with a quiet kind of joy. I can't believe how much we've changed, he said, wiping his hands on a towel. It feels like we're new again. I mean, we're not, there's still so much to work on, but it feels like we're figuring it out. I smiled, leaning against the counter. Yeah, it does. But I think we're finally learning how to really see each other again. Evan stepped closer, his eyes warm. I see you, Lily. I always have. I reached out, taking his hand, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. There were no guarantees. There was still so much we needed to work through. But I wasn't afraid of the journey anymore. I wasn't afraid of what lay ahead. We were both trying. And that, I realized, was more than enough. The weeks passed, each one a small step forward. There were still difficult moments. Quiet evenings when the weight of the past pressed heavily between us. Moments when the doubts I had buried deep inside surfaced, and I wasn't sure how to silence them. But there was progress. We were learning to communicate again, slowly but surely. It wasn't a perfect, smooth path, but it was real. One Saturday afternoon, as we were sorting through old boxes in the attic, stuffed with forgotten memories, random keepsakes, and old photos, I came across something that made me pause. It was a photograph of Evan and me on our honeymoon, standing by the beach with the sun setting behind us. We were laughing, our faces full of that young, naive happiness that came with starting a life together, filled with dreams and possibilities. I hadn't seen that photo in years. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a wave of nostalgia, followed by something else. Something deeper. It wasn't just longing for the past, but a realization. That version of us, the young and carefree couple, had been real. The love we shared back then had been real. And even though the road we had traveled since then had been rocky, even though we had hurt each other and drifted apart, there was still a foundation beneath everything. That love was still there, buried under the layers of pain and regret, waiting to be rediscovered. I felt a sudden surge of emotion, and I turned to find Evan standing next to me, glancing down at the photo in my hands. His expression was unreadable for a moment, and then he sighed, sitting down next to me on the dusty attic floor. I remember that day. He said softly, his voice distant. We were so happy. We didn't know what was coming, how much we'd change. I nodded, my throat tightening. It feels like a lifetime ago, doesn't it? It does, he agreed. But I think what we've forgotten is that the happiness we had back then, it wasn't just about the honeymoon or the trips we took. It was about us. It was about how we loved each other, how we built our lives together. I know we lost sight of that. I know I lost sight of that. But I'm here now, trying to find my way back to you, back to us. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. I didn't know if I could ever go back to who we were then. But maybe, just maybe, I didn't need to. Maybe what we needed was to create something new. Something that built on that foundation, but also acknowledged where we had been and what we had learned. I'm scared, Evan, I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared of getting hurt again. I'm scared that I'll put myself out there and we'll just end up in the same place. He took my hand, his grip firm yet gentle. I know, Lily. I'm scared too. But I can't promise that it won't be hard, or that everything will be perfect. But I can promise that I'm going to try every day to show you that I love you. I'm not giving up. Not on you, not on us. I looked at him. Really looked at him. His eyes were filled with sincerity, and there was no hesitation in his words. He wasn't asking for blind trust, but he was asking for a chance. Just like I was. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that maybe we didn't have to have all the answers. Maybe we just needed to take this journey one step at a time. We spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking, in a way we hadn't in years. We shared our fears, our hopes, the things we still struggled with, and the things we were beginning to rebuild. And though there was still uncertainty, there was something else too. An understanding that we weren't alone in this anymore. We were both in it, together. A few days later, Evan surprised me with a little getaway. A weekend trip to the mountains, a place we had visited when we were first dating. It was his way of showing me that he was committed to making new memories, not just holding on to the old ones. As we drove up the winding road, the landscape changing from city to forest, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. We didn't need to fix everything right away. We didn't need to have the perfect relationship. But what mattered now was that we were trying, together. The weekend was simple, peaceful. We hiked through the trails, talked over dinners, and spent quiet evenings by the fire. There were still moments when the past crept up, but there were also moments when I realized that it was okay to be in the present. We didn't need to be the people we once were, but maybe, just maybe, we could create a new version of ourselves, one that acknowledged both the good and the bad. On the last evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned shades of pink and purple, we sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars begin to appear. Evan took my hand, his touch warm and comforting. I know it's not going to be easy, he said quietly, but I'm glad you're still here, and I'll keep showing you that I'm worth staying for. I looked at him, feeling a rush of emotion. I'm glad too, I whispered. I'm scared. I'm still unsure of a lot of things. But I'm willing to try, Evan. I'm willing to keep trying. He smiled, squeezing my hand. That's all I need. We didn't need to say anything more. In that moment, I realized that we had both found something more important than answers. We had found the courage to keep moving forward, one step at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. It had been months since that weekend in the mountains, and things between Evan and me had continued to improve. Slowly, steadily, but with a quiet understanding that this wasn't a quick fix. We were still learning, still healing. But there was a kind of peace between us now, a calm that hadn't been there for years. The conversations were more open, the silences more comfortable. We were making it work. That evening after dinner, we sat on the porch again, as we often did. The summer air was warm, and the sound of crickets filled the night. I looked at Evan, his face lit by the soft glow of the lantern beside us, and for a moment I felt the familiar flutter in my chest. The same flutter I had once felt when I first met him. It wasn't the wild, heady passion of our early days, but it was something real, something that felt like home. I'm glad we're here, I said softly, resting my head on his shoulder. I'm glad we didn't give up. He turned to look at me, his hand brushing against mine. Me too. I know we've been through a lot, but I believe in us, Lily. I really do. I smiled, but there was a nagging feeling at the back of my mind, an unease that had been growing over the past few days. It wasn't anything specific, just a strange feeling that something was off. But I didn't want to ruin the moment. We had come so far, and I wasn't about to let this feeling ruin the peace we had built. But then, just as I was about to push it away, something caught my eye from the corner of the porch. A small silver envelope had been slipped under the door. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was unmistakably there. Neatly placed, almost deliberately. It was unmarked, no return address, nothing to identify who had left it. I stood up and walked over to the envelope, my heart racing slightly. Evan looked up, noticing my sudden change in demeanor. What is it? He asked, his voice curious but with a hint of concern. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. It was thin, but there was something inside that made it seem heavier than it should be. I don't know, I muttered, my voice trailing off as I turned it over. It was sealed with a dark red wax, the kind you might see in old films, and there were no markings of any kind. Evan stood up too, his brow furrowing. That's strange. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of the moment settling in, but I couldn't ignore the curiosity that had been sparked. Slowly, I tore open the seal and slid the contents out. It was a single folded piece of paper. Nothing else. When I opened it, I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and a chill ran down my spine. It was a photograph. A photo of Evan and me, taken from the shadows in the middle of one of our quiet moments on the porch. The picture was blurry, as though the photographer had been careful not to be seen, but there was no mistaking the scene. It was a moment from just a few days ago. A private moment, one that felt too intimate to have been captured by anyone other than us. I felt a sudden tightness in my chest. Evan, do you know anything about this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, peering at the photo in my hand. His face went pale as he stared at it, his expression shifting from confusion to something darker, something I couldn't place. I don't know who would have taken this, he said, his voice tight. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for reassurance. Lily, I swear I don't know anything about it. My heart was racing now, my mind spiraling with questions. Who would leave this here? Why had they done it? And why, after everything we had been through, did it feel like this was the start of something much bigger? I folded the photo back into the envelope, trying to steady my breath, but the unease in my stomach wouldn't go away. I could tell Evan was just as shaken as I was, but he was trying to keep it together, trying to act like this was just a strange coincidence. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't. I looked up at him, the fear now unmistakable in my eyes. "Do you think someone's watching us?" Evan's face darkened, his jaw tightening. "I don't know, but we need to find out who's behind this, and why." But no matter how many questions we asked, no matter how much we searched, we never found the answers. The strange incidents continued. Small, unsettling things that didn't make sense. An anonymous text, a phone call with no one on the other end, the constant feeling that we were being watched. It felt like someone, or something, was just out of sight, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment. The deeper we dug, the more tangled the mystery became. Every lead seemed to disappear. Every clue felt like it was part of a puzzle we weren't equipped to solve. And as much as we wanted to find answers, I started to wonder if we ever would. For now, though, there was nothing we could do but wait. Wait for the next strange message, wait for the next photograph to appear. And with each passing day, the question loomed larger. Who was watching us? And why? I looked at Evan, and for the first time in months, I felt a cold shiver of uncertainty. The peace we had fought so hard to build was being shattered by something neither of us understood. The story wasn't over, not yet. But what came next? Neither of us could have predicted.